They said he'd never make it. A poor black kid with a stutter and a dream, so foolish his teacher ripped the paper in half. You? On television? The class laughed. But decades later, that same boy mailed her a brand new TV every Christmas so she'd never forget the face she once mocked. Before the fame, before the $1 million suits, there was a 1976 Ford parked under a dying streetlight. That car was his home for 3 years. His fridge, a cooler in the trunk, his bed, the front seat, and his dream, still taped to the windshield, I will be on TV. Then came the miracle call that changed everything, but also the curse that would follow him for life. The night he crowned the wrong Miss Universe, the world saw a laughable mistake. What they didn't see was a man reliving the nightmare of his past failure, shame, humiliation, the same pain he had spent a lifetime burying. Steve Harvey rose higher than anyone expected, but every victory carried a shadow. Broken families, betrayal, bankruptcy, and the endless fear that everything could vanish again. What tore him down wasn't failure, it was success. And yet, somehow, he turned even that into faith. But the story doesn't end here because the real tragedy of Steve Harvey was never on stage. It was what he lost when the cameras stopped rolling. To millions, Steve Harvey is laughter itself. The booming voice, the sharp suits, the quick wit that could slice through tension like silk. He stands on stage, a towering symbol of success, confidence, and charm. But behind that golden glow lies a life built on ashes, stitched together by hunger, heartbreak, and a belief so unyielding it bordered on madness. Steve Harvey's story is not one of instant fame. It's a symphony of pain turned into punchlines. Born in Welch, West Virginia, in 1957, he was the youngest of 5 children in a family that never stopped struggling. His father, Jesse, was a coal miner whose lungs filled with black dust long before retirement. His mother, Eloise, a teacher, stretched every dollar until it begged for mercy. When the family moved to Cleveland, Ohio, poverty came with them like an unwanted passenger. East 112th Street, where the air smelled of rust and rain, and hope often came secondhand, was where Steve learned 2 things: how to endure and how to dream. His stutter made him an easy target. Every word felt like climbing a mountain with no air, every syllable a war. When his teacher asked the class what they wanted to be, Steve's trembling hand rose. "I want to be on television," he wrote. Laughter erupted. The teacher tore the paper and said, "You'll never be on TV." That moment branded him. Years later, he'd still hear the sound of paper tearing in his sleep. But his father saw something else. Jesse Harvey told his son, "Write it down again. Put it on your wall. Read it every morning and every night." That single command became Steve's first gospel. Every morning before school, every night before bed, he'd whisper, "I will be on TV." And he kept whispering long after life stopped whispering back. He carried that dream through every odd job: mailman, carpet cleaner, insurance salesman, mechanic, even boxer. Nothing stuck, except the echo of that promise. And then, in 1985, destiny dared him. A friend signed him up for an open mic night in a small Cleveland club. The lights were harsh, the crowd restless, and his jokes stumbled like his childhood speech. But halfway through, something shifted. The laughter came raw, thunderous, freeing. For the first time, Steve wasn't stuttering. He was soaring. That night, he made $50. It wasn't money, it was oxygen. He walked into the cold and cried. "I was born tonight," he said. But every birth comes with pain. The road ahead wasn't paved with applause. It was lined with empty pockets, broken cars, and endless rejection. For 3 years, Steve Harvey lived in that battered Ford, sleeping under parking lot lights, washing in public bathrooms, and eating whatever kindness could spare. Every morning, he repeated the words his father had given him: "I will be on TV." The universe, it seems, only rewards those who refuse to stop talking to it. One night, he almost gave up. Then came 2 messages on his answering machine, 2 shows, 2 gigs, $300 total. It was enough to fly him to New York and the stage of Showtime at the Apollo. That one flight changed everything. The homeless man with a stutter became a name, a face, a force. By the 1,990 seconds, he was unstoppable stand-up specials, the Steve Harvey Show, the Kings of Comedy Tour. Yet the more he rose, the lonelier the air became. The same world that cheered his jokes rarely saw the tears behind his smile. He once confessed, "The laugh you hear is the wound I turned inside out." For decades, the world saw the crown, but never the scars that kept it balanced. The empire was growing, so was the cost. Two divorces, financial collapse, health battles, and a humiliation broadcast to millions, these were the invisible prices of success. He had conquered the world, but he was still haunted by that voice from childhood whispering, "You'll never belong here." Steve Harvey didn't just survive Hollywood. He wrestled with it, tooth and soul, until it respected him. But the real miracle of his story isn't that he made it, it's that he made it again and again after losing everything. His journey is proof of a painful truth. You can rise from nothing, lose it all, and still rebuild from the ruins if your faith burns hotter than your fear. And yet, the story of Steve Harvey's rise is only half the truth. The other half begins where fame meets fracture, where the lights fade, and the cost of laughter becomes unbearable. Before the applause, before the golden microphones and best-selling books, there was a boy who spoke to walls because no one else would listen. Steve Harvey's childhood was a long stretch of silence, broken only by the stammering rhythm of a boy who wanted to speak the world into existence but couldn't. He was born Broderick Stephen Harvey on the 17th of January 1957 in Welch, West Virginia, a town wrapped in soot and sorrow, where men disappeared into coal mines before dawn and returned at dusk looking like shadows of themselves. His father, Jesse Harvey, was one of them, lungs blackened, hands cracked, spirit unbroken. His mother, Eloise Vera, taught in local schools, saving every nickel and every ounce of grace she could muster. Together, they raised 5 children in a house that creaked more from hope than from wood. When Steve was still young, the Harveys left Welch for Cleveland, Ohio, searching for a better life. The neighborhood they landed in, East 112th Street, was as rough as the dream they carried. Years later, that same street would bear his name, Steve Harvey Way. But back then, it was just another cracked stretch of pavement where children learned to run faster than trouble. Poverty clung to them like coal dust that wouldn't wash off. Steve wore hand-me-down shoes so worn you could count the ground through them. Lunch money was a luxury, and winters bit like knives. Yet what cut deepest wasn't hunger, it was humiliation. His stutter turned classrooms into arenas of cruelty. Words betrayed him, twisted and caught in his throat while laughter echoed from every corner. He once said, "I knew what I wanted to say, but my mouth wouldn't let me be me." And then came the day that changed everything. It was a routine assignment. Write down what you want to be when you grow up. For a few trembling seconds, the boy hesitated, then pressed his pencil to the paper. "I want to be on television." It was not a dream. It was a declaration. But the laughter that followed was louder than any applause he'd ever received later in life. The teacher tore the page in half and told him, "You'll never be on TV. A boy like you should learn to be realistic." The humiliation burned through him like coal fire. That night, he handed the torn paper to his mother. She looked heartbroken, but his father, the man who carried silence like armor, saw something else. "Write it again," Jesse said. "Put it on your wall. Read it every morning and every night. Make it your promise." That sentence became the pulse of Steve Harvey's life. Every morning before the sun rose, and every night before he slept, he whispered the same words, "I will be on TV." He called it his daily covenant. It wasn't a dream anymore, it was survival. High school gave him his first stage, though it wasn't one with lights. He joined the Glenville High Track team and found his rhythm not in words, but in motion. Running made sense. There were no syllables to trip over, no laughter to dodge, only wind and willpower. He became known for his speed and determination, the quiet boy who didn't talk much but never quit running. Teachers still doubted him. Classmates still laughed, but there was one place where he never stuttered, in front of the mirror. There, in the privacy of his mother's bathroom, young Steve would rehearse fake TV shows, pretending to host interviews, making up commercials, and announcing imaginary guests. "It sounds crazy," he once said, "but I practiced being on TV before anyone ever believed I could." Then came the letter, the one that proved how far he'd come and how far he had yet to go. Years later, when he was already famous, Steve told the story on his show. Every Christmas, he would send his old teacher a television, wrapped neatly, with a single note. "Every year, you said I'd never be on TV. Now you can't turn it off." It was not revenge, it was redemption. A full circle, carved from pain. The values his parents planted never left him. Jesse taught him work was a prayer. Eloise taught him faith was action. When Jesse died in 2000, Steve said the hardest thing he ever did was keep laughing while my heart broke. His father had become the voice in his head, the one that whispered through every failure, "Keep your promise, boy. Keep your promise." Growing up black in 1,960 seconds, America added another layer of struggle. Opportunity was rationed. The world didn't hand out chances, it demanded miracles. Yet within the boundaries of racism and poverty, Steve Harvey learned to turn shame into humor, fear into faith. He learned to survive by making others smile, long before he ever held a microphone. But childhood wasn't just about pain. There were flashes of joy, small victories that shimmered like fireflies in the dark. Saturday mornings meant gospel on the radio, neighbors laughing on porches, and the smell of Eloise's cooking drifting through cracked windows. Music and laughter became oxygen, the language that transcended everything he couldn't yet say. Still, destiny waited impatiently. When he graduated from Glenville High in 1974, his dreams remained intact but unexplored. He didn't go straight to Hollywood. He took the long road through every ordinary struggle a working man can face: factory jobs, failed gigs, missed rent payments, and the constant ache of not being where he believed he should be. He was still that boy with a promise taped to his wall, just older, hungrier, and more restless. He would later say, "I didn't become funny because I wanted to. I became funny because I was broke." And perhaps that's what made him unforgettable. Steve Harvey didn't invent his humor. He mined it from pain. Every childhood scar became a story. Every failure, a punchline. Every humiliation, a brick in the foundation of an empire. The stutter that once silenced him became the very rhythm of his voice, proof that God doesn't waste pain. From the cracked sidewalks of East 112th Street to the blazing lights of Hollywood, his journey had already begun. But fate wasn't done testing him yet. The boy who once whispered his dream into the dark was about to step into a world that would both crown him and crucify him in equal measure. Because the road from "I will be on TV" to "I am on TV" is never straight. It's carved in heartbreak, resilience, and the kind of faith that refuses to die, even when the dream almost does. The road from dreaming to doing is never paved. It's gravel, glass, and broken bones. For Steve Harvey, it began in the dust and diesel of working-class America, where dreams were things you kept quiet about, like a secret too fragile to expose to air. After high school, he bounced through jobs like a man searching for oxygen. He carried mail for the U.S. Postal Service, sold insurance door to door, scrubbed carpets until his hands cracked, worked on assembly lines, even stepped into a boxing ring for cash. Each shift was just survival: one more day, one more meal, one more reason not to quit. But in every job, the same voice echoed from somewhere deep inside him: "You don't belong here." By the mid-1980 seconds, that whisper had grown too loud to ignore. One night, in Cleveland, fate disguised itself as a dare. A friend signed him up for an open mic competition at a small club. Harvey didn't even plan to go, but something in him stirred. He had nothing left to lose. When his name was called, he walked onto the stage under weak yellow lights, clutching fear like a lifeline. His first joke stumbled, his second nearly died, but by the third, something clicked. The laughter rolled through the room like a storm breaking open the sky. That night he earned $50. For a man living paycheck to paycheck, it was nothing. But for a man dying without purpose, it was everything. That $50 felt like $1,000,000, he later said. It told me I was supposed to do this. The next morning, Steve quit his job. He had no safety net, no plan, only a calling. But callings, unlike careers, don't pay rent. The dream soon turned cruel. Gigs were rare, money scarcer. There were nights when the lights stayed off because the bill hadn't been paid, mornings when breakfast was just imagination. And when the walls finally gave up on him, the car took over. A battered 1976 Ford became home, prison, and church. The back seat was his bed, the trunk his refrigerator, a cooler filled with bologna sandwiches that stretched across days. He washed in gas station sinks, prayed in parking lots, cried into the steering wheel. "You can do it for a week," he once said, "but 3 years in a car will break you." But faith is strange. It hides inside desperation like a spark in ash. Every night, before sleep, he whispered the same words his father had given him decades earlier: "I will be on TV." He was broke, hungry, and invisible. But he was also closer to destiny than he'd ever been. One night, as he hovered on the edge of giving up, he checked his answering machine back then, a small box of plastic hope. Two messages blinked. The first, a club in Jacksonville offering $150. The second, another gig the very next night for the same amount. Combined, they were enough to buy a cheap ticket to New York City. He didn't know it yet, but those $300 would change his entire life. That weekend, he stepped onto the stage of Showtime at the Apollo, Harlem's legendary temple of laughter, and something divine happened. The same voice that once stuttered in a Cleveland classroom now roared across the crowd, crisp, magnetic, unstoppable. Every punchline hit like a revelation. When the lights dimmed and the applause thundered, he wasn't just performing, he was being reborn. From that night forward, everything shifted. Bookings multiplied. He became a touring comedian, hustling city to city, sometimes driving all night to make a morning show. He learned how to read crowds the way miners read rock, listening for where the gold was. Yet even success has its cruel timing. His marriage was collapsing, the distance stretching into silence. Nights filled with applause gave way to lonely hotel rooms. On stage, he made the world laugh. Off stage, he could barely smile. "I was living two lives," he later admitted. "The one people saw, and the one I was surviving." By the early 1990 seconds, Steve Harvey was no longer a struggling comedian, he was the comedian. His presence on It's Showtime at the Apollo turned him into a household name. For 7 years, he hosted the show that had once saved him, transforming it into a cultural ritual. Harlem adored him. America followed. He was raw, unpredictable, real, the kind of entertainer who made you laugh even while confessing his own scars. And yet, for all the applause, he was still haunted by the shadows of those years in the car. Every check he cashed, every stage he stepped onto, came with a silent vow. Never again. Never hunger. Never darkness. Never the sound of rain against a windshield while you're trying to fall asleep in the back seat. That vow became his drive and his curse. He worked like a man outrunning his past, piling gigs on top of exhaustion, projects on top of pain, stand-up specials, radio shows, guest appearances, anything that kept the wheels turning. He later said, "Fear of going back kept me moving forward." In 1994, his first sitcom, Me and the Boys, hit ABC. It was short-lived, but it opened the door to something far greater, The Steve Harvey Show. From 1996 to 2002, that series became a cultural anchor for Black families across America, a blend of humor, warmth, and hard-earned wisdom. For the first time, Steve wasn't just the funny man. He was a role model. Viewers saw a confident, fatherly figure guiding his students and audience with laughter and love. What they didn't see were the tears shed between tapings, the constant battle to balance fame with family, performance with peace. "Fame don't heal," he once said. "It just hides the wound better." Behind every laugh, there was fatigue. Behind every camera flash, a man afraid the light would fade too soon. Still, Harvey's legend kept growing. He became part of the Kings of Comedy tour alongside Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hughley, and Bernie Mac. The tour was electric, four giants commanding arenas, redefining what black comedy could be. When Spike Lee filmed it in 2000, the original Kings of Comedy became a cultural time capsule, and Steve Harvey, its steady heartbeat. From there, he seemed untouchable. But life has a way of humbling even the mightiest. The higher he climbed, the thinner the air became. Success gave him crowns but also changed expectations, debts, exhaustion, and the gnawing suspicion that joy was something he might never get to keep. The man who once slept in a car was now performing for thousands. Yet some nights, he admitted, "I still feel like I'm parked on the side of the road, waiting for something to change." That's the cruel irony of dreams. They come true, but they don't come free. Steve Harvey had reached the mountaintop, but every mountain casts a shadow, and his was just beginning to fall. The dawn of the 2000s found Steve Harvey standing atop the world he had once dreamed of from the cracked seat of his old Ford. He had clawed his way from gas station sinks to red carpets, from sleeping in parking lots to owning the stage. To the public, he was indestructible, suave in tailored suits, commanding on television, his laughter a national anthem of perseverance. But even as the lights grew brighter, the shadows behind them began to lengthen. The Steve Harvey Show was a hit, a warm blend of humor, mentorship, and family values that resonated across generations. Teachers, students, and working-class families saw themselves in it. The laughter wasn't just comedy, it was catharsis. For 6 years, Harvey carried that sitcom like a crown and a cross. He was no longer just a comedian, he was a father figure to millions. Yet, he often confessed that the set, full of studio lights and scripted joy, sometimes felt quieter than his own home. His day began before dawn and ended when exhaustion blurred the edges of night. After the sitcom wrapped in 2002, he should have rested. Instead, he doubled down radio shows, stand-up tours, books, endorsements, television appearances. The world had learned his name, and he refused to give it back. Then came the Kings of Comedy Tour, a phenomenon that redefined the cultural landscape. Four voices, Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, DL, Hughley, and Bernie Mac took the stage like prophets with microphones. Together they filled arenas, selling out night after night, transforming comedy into something closer to religion. Spike Lee captured it in the original Kings of Comedy, 2000, immortalizing Harvey's blend of wisdom, warmth, and soul-deep rhythm. Each performance was electric. Bernie brought the fire, Cedric the joy, DL the sharp wit, but Steve was the heartbeat, the one who tied it all together. His humor wasn't just funny, it was faith in disguise. He turned his personal battles into punchlines, his scars into sermons. "The laugh you hear," he once said, "is the wound I turned inside out." That wound, however, never truly healed. Fame is a double-edged gift. It feeds you, then devours you. By the mid-2000s, Steve was hosting radio shows in the morning, taping television by day, performing stand-up by night. Sleep became a stranger. "When you've been broke, rest feels dangerous," he joked once. But the truth was no joke, he was burning out. In 2009, another transformation came. Harvey released Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, a relationship guide born from years of heartbreak, observation, and his own evolving faith. The book exploded, has shown on the New York Times bestseller list, adapted into a hit movie, and made him not just an entertainer, but a cultural voice. Suddenly, women across the world quoted his words, debated his philosophy, and filled arenas to hear him speak, not as a comedian, but as a teacher. He had turned pain into doctrine, survival into success. And yet, behind every interview, smile was the ache of distance from family, from peace, from rest. Awards and honors followed like a flood. BET Humanitarian of the Year, 2011. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 2013. Multiple daytime Emmys, and NAACP Image Awards. Each one felt like a vindication of that little boy from East 112th Street. Every trophy was proof that poverty had not won, but even in triumph, he carried the ghosts of loss. "I kept thinking," he said, "my daddy died before he saw all this. All I ever wanted was to make him proud. I just didn't know it would cost so much." At this peak, Steve Harvey wasn't just a comedian, he was an empire. He hosted Family Feud, The Steve Harvey Morning Show, Little Big Shots, and Miss Universe. His suits became statements, his words gospel, his brand synonymous with inspiration. He was living proof that belief could move mountains. But the same spotlight that illuminates can also scorch. In December 2015, during the Miss Universe pageant, Steve Harvey made a mistake that would haunt him across continents. One slip of the tongue, one wrong name, and the internet exploded. For 60 seconds, the world stood still as he crowned the wrong queen. Cameras flashed, gasps echoed, headlines multiplied. The moment replayed endlessly across screens, each loop like salt on an old wound. "I felt my soul leave my body," he admitted later. "I knew what it meant, humiliation on a global stage." The man who had fought his way out of homelessness now stood under the harshest light imaginable, every meme, every mockery clawing at his dignity. He could have vanished, but he didn't. The next year, he walked back on that same stage and hosted the show again. No excuses, no bitterness, just courage. "You can't fix what you won't face," he said. And in that moment, he redefined not just success, but integrity. Still, the emotional toll was immense. The laughter that once came so easily began to feel heavier, slower. Years of overwork had left their mark. His health faltered, high blood pressure, fatigue, anxiety. He learned that even empires have expiration dates if you forget to rest. But Harvey's greatest strength was reinvention. Out of scandal, he built renewal. Out of mistakes, he forged meaning. He expanded Family Feud internationally, South Africa, Ghana, soon Botswana. His production company, Steve Harvey Global, grew into a multimedia empire, and through it all, he kept preaching one message: faith and discipline. When asked what kept him alive during the chaos, he said, "Every time I think it's over, God whispers, 'Not yet.'" Behind the jokes and sermons, though, there was always a quieter truth. Steve Harvey had achieved everything he once prayed for, but he had also lost things that prayers can't restore. Two marriages had ended in heartbreak, friendships had fractured under the weight of fame, and the fear that had once driven him still lingered, the fear of falling back into the dark. Fame had given him everything except peace. Yet in that tension, in that constant dance between triumph and tragedy, lay the essence of Steve Harvey's story. A man who rose not because he was fearless, but because he kept moving through fear. A man who understood that failure is never final unless you stop showing up. At his peak, he was no longer just a comedian or a host. He was a mirror for millions who had stumbled, fallen, and gotten back up. His life was no longer about punchlines, it was about perseverance. But every rise casts a longer shadow, and Steve Harvey's darkest storm was still waiting beyond the lights. Every empire, no matter how grand, carries its own fault lines. For Steve Harvey, the cracks began quietly behind the laughter, behind the fame, behind the man the world believed had finally outrun pain. But pain has a strange way of catching up, even to those who learn to turn it into jokes. The first blow was personal, not public. In the silence between flights, tapings, and applause, he began losing the one thing he could never replace: his peace. Fame had given him wealth, but stolen stillness. "When you're poor," he once said, "you just want to eat. When you're rich, you just want to sleep." And sleep, for Harvey, had become a memory. His second marriage was unraveling in front of cameras and courtrooms. The headlines were cruel. The man who had built his brand on family values was suddenly branded as the opposite. Accusations flew like shards of glass. Infidelity, betrayal, greed. Though much of it was disproven, the damage lingered. "It wasn't divorce," he later said quietly. "It was demolition." And yet, the emotional storm was only half the battle. In 2005, when the dust of his personal life settled, Harvey faced a darker discovery: financial ruin. He walked into a bank, inserted his card, and saw a balance that mocked him $1,700. It didn't make sense. He was working nonstop, hosting shows, performing, earning millions. But behind the scenes, chaos had been festering. A trusted accountant had failed to pay his taxes for 7 years. 7 years of penalties, interest, and mounting debt. The total owed was catastrophic millions. The IRS doesn't knock, it descends. For a man who had once lived in a car, the fear of losing everything again wasn't just professional, it was existential. "I thought God had brought me all this way just to watch me fall again," he later admitted. "That was the darkest hour of my life." He could have hidden. He could have filed bankruptcy. Instead, he did what he always did: he fought. Every morning before dawn, he was live on his radio show, his voice smooth and steady even as anxiety pressed on his chest. By day, he filmed television. By night, he performed comedy. There were no weekends, no rest, no luxury, just relentless motion. "I owed Uncle Sam, and I owed myself the truth," he said. "So I worked like a man on fire." The years that followed were brutal. Exhaustion blurred his edges. His faith became both sword and shield. Slowly, painfully, he paid every cent. When it was done, he didn't throw a party, he just cried. "The devil wanted my peace," he told an interviewer, "but God wanted my persistence." Then, just as the storms began to calm, fate found a new way to test him. It was the 20th of December 2015, Miss Universe, live television, millions watching across the globe. Harvey, immaculately dressed, holding a card, ready to announce the winner. One word wrong, one breath too fast, and the unthinkable happened. He crowned the wrong queen. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the gasps, the confusion, the headlines, the humiliation. Within hours, the clip had gone viral, replayed, remixed, ridiculed. He became a meme, a punchline, the very thing he had spent decades mastering. "I wanted to disappear," he said later. "It wasn't funny to me. It was a nightmare. For days he couldn't eat. He imagined his career ending in that single moment. But the same faith that had carried him through cars, courts, and creditors whispered again, "Stand back up." So he did. The following year, he walked onto that same stage, under those same lights, and hosted Miss Universe again. Not to redeem the show, but to redeem himself. The crowd rose to its feet. The man who had once apologized to the world now smiled through his scars. That moment didn't erase the mistake, it transformed it. The blunder became a bridge. Fans saw something beyond the suit and the smile. A man who could own his failures with dignity. "The world watched me fall," he said, "so I decided to let them watch me get back up." But fame, once cracked, never fully mends. In 2019, NBC abruptly canceled The Steve Harvey Show, the program that had been his creative sanctuary for 7 years. He found out not through an executive, but through headlines. "It felt like a death," he said. "I gave everything to that show." The timing was merciless. Within weeks, he was off 2 major networks, and tabloids began whispering that his career was in decline. But Steve Harvey was not a man who accepted endings. He pivoted, as he always had, turning the pain into momentum. He expanded Family Feud globally, producing versions across Africa, investing in his media company, mentoring young entrepreneurs. He rebuilt his brand brick by brick, without bitterness. "I learned that when God closes a door," he said, "he doesn't lock it. He just wants you to stop knocking and build your own house." Still, the cracks beneath the surface deepened. Years of relentless work had taken their toll on his body. High blood pressure, sleep apnea, fatigue warnings that success had come at too high a price. The same drive that once saved him was now threatening to kill him. And yet, even in weakness, Harvey refused to yield. He built a new life around discipline and redemption. The gym became his new stage, prayer his microphone. "I can't stop getting older," he told Men's Health, "but I can stop dying before my time." The public, however, rarely saw that vulnerability. They saw the showman, the icon, the immaculately dressed king of daytime TV. What they didn't see was the quiet man who sometimes sat alone at night, staring at old photos of his father, wondering if he'd finally done enough to make him proud. Then came love unexpected, redemptive, saving. When he met Marjorie Bridges, it wasn't just romance, it was resurrection. "She saw the man, not the myth," he said. "She loved me when I didn't even like me." With her came healing, with her came faith restored, and with her came the family he had always chased but never caught. The tragedy of Steve Harvey was never that he failed, it was that he kept winning while bleeding. Behind the laughter was a man who had lived 1,000 lives, buried 1,000 fears, and yet kept finding a way to rise. And that's what makes his story haunting. Because the deeper truth of Steve Harvey's life isn't just about struggle or success, it's about the cost of never letting yourself stop fighting. He once said, "The laugh you hear is not my joy, it's my survival." And in those words lies the soul of every man who's ever had to smile through pain. When the noise finally quieted after the scandals, the shows, the sleepless years, Steve Harvey found himself staring into something he hadn't felt in decades: stillness. For a man who had lived life sprinting from one stage to another, stillness was unfamiliar, even frightening. But this time, he didn't run from it, he leaned in. By the mid-2010 seconds, Harvey's empire was vast. Family Feud had become a global phenomenon, syndicated in dozens of countries. His voice ruled the airwaves each morning on the Steve Harvey Morning Show, reaching millions. His books topped charts, his motivational tours sold out arenas, and his brand had expanded into publishing, production, wellness, and even fashion. But behind every suit and smile was a man who had finally learned to stop chasing survival and start living. The catalyst was Marjorie. He met her years earlier, back when the world was still pulling him apart. She was grace wrapped in calm, the opposite of chaos. "I don't know who you are," he told her from the stage of a comedy club in Memphis, "but I'm going to marry you one day." Fate separated them then, but destiny kept the promise. They reunited in 2005 when Steve was bruised, humbled, and almost out of faith. 2 years later, at 50, he married her and his life finally exhaled. "She gave me peace," he said simply. "I'd been searching for peace my whole life." As a break hit off, together, they built not just a marriage, but a blended family that redefined love. Between Steve's 3 biological children, Marjorie's 3 from her previous marriage, and their son Winton, they created a home where laughter, forgiveness, and chaos coexisted beautifully. "I don't call them stepchildren," he said. They're mine. I gave them my name, and they gave me my purpose. In 2015, during a televised Father's Day tribute, one of Marjorie's sons turned to him and said, "You gave me your last name. There's no one better than you, Dad." Steve broke down in tears on live television, not the tears of guilt or exhaustion that once haunted him, but of redemption. The boy who once slept in a car now sat surrounded by children who called him father, not by blood, but by choice. That peace rippled into every part of his life. Harvey began focusing on mentoring and philanthropy, creating the Steve and Marjorie Foundation to provide scholarships and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. His message shifted from comedy to calling. He wasn't just entertaining anymore, he was teaching. Yet, his drive never dimmed. Through Steve Harvey Global, he transformed his brand into an international force. He licensed Family Feud across Africa, personally hosting versions in South Africa and Ghana. He became a bridge between Hollywood and the African continent, proudly calling it the next big chapter of entertainment. When asked why he kept expanding instead of retiring, he smiled, "Because God didn't wake me up this morning to be average." But behind that determination lies something deeper: discipline born from fear. The man who once had $1,700 left in the bank still keeps reminders of scarcity close. "Every time I walk through my house," he said, "I remember that car. I remember the hunger. That's what keeps me grateful." His house today is a symbol of that gratitude. The sprawling 17-acre estate in Atlanta, once owned by Tyler Perry, is more than a mansion, it's a metaphor. From its marble halls to its hidden ballroom and quiet garden, it stands as proof that even those born in the dust can rise to own the skyline. But age and wisdom have softened him. He often talks about health, faith, and mortality. High blood pressure, sleep apnea, and fatigue have become reminders that no success is worth dying for. He trains daily, eats clean, prays constantly, and still wakes before dawn to speak to millions. His mornings begin not with noise, but with scripture. "Every blessing I have," he says, "came after I learned to be still. It's Sid body has to wait." And stillness has finally taught him something the grind never could. That happiness is not applause, not money, not even legacy. It's the sound of his family's laughter echoing through the halls, the comfort of knowing that when he puts down the microphone, someone is waiting at home. He no longer defines success by ratings or revenue, but by the people who love him when the cameras go dark. For a man who once believed he had to fight the world to earn his worth, Steve Harvey now carries a quieter truth. You don't win by conquering everything, you win by learning what's worth keeping. And as he approaches 70, the mirror shows more than wrinkles and gray hair, it shows a man who survived himself. Legacy isn't built in a moment, it's carved, painfully and persistently, over a lifetime. And few legacies in modern entertainment feel as complex, as human, or as hard-earned as Steve Harvey's. His story is more than a rags to riches fairy tale. It's a sermon in motion, equal parts triumph, testimony, and turbulence. In an era obsessed with image, Harvey's power has always come from authenticity. He never hid the dirt beneath the diamonds. He never pretended his past didn't ache. He wore his pain like a tailored suit, fitted but visible. In doing so, he became a new kind of cultural figure, not the flawless icon, but the flawed survivor who made imperfection look powerful. To generations of Black Americans, his success meant more than fame. It was vindication. A son of coal miners and school teachers who had once been laughed at for dreaming now stood as a symbol that persistence can outwork prejudice. He represented the intersection of grit and grace, proof that faith, not luck, was the ultimate currency of progress. Harvey's influence stretched beyond laughter. His voice, smooth, commanding, fatherly, became part of the American soundscape. Family Feud turned him into the patriarch of daytime television, where his humor bridged generations and cultures. His morning radio show, syndicated in more than 100 markets, became therapy for millions of commuters, part church, part comedy club, part confessional booth. And through his motivational talks, he became something rarer still. A man who could make you laugh, cry, and pray in the same breath. "You can't outdream God," he often told audiences, "but you can disappoint him by thinking too small." Those words, as much as any punchline, defined his legacy. Harvey's storytelling redefined how celebrities talked about struggle. He didn't just confess his failures, he reframed them as fuel. He transformed the language of pain into the language of progress. In an age of filtered perfection, he stood for the messy truth. That faith doesn't spare you from the storm, it teaches you how to walk through it. Critics sometimes mocked his grandiosity, his preaching tone, or his wealth. But even they couldn't deny the discipline behind the man. Every empire he built, radio, television, books, business, fashion, philanthropy, was a brick laid on the foundation of that one childhood promise: I will be on TV, and by extension, I will matter. Perhaps the most poignant part of Harvey's legacy is how deeply it's intertwined with redemption. Every stage of his career mirrors a phase of atonement. Atonement to his first family, to his faith, to the child who once stuttered in class. Through decades of mistakes and miracles, he's evolved from entertainer to elder, from punchline to pastor of perseverance. His philanthropic work, the Steve and Marjorie Foundation, has given scholarships, mentorships, and life skills to countless young people who see in him what he once saw in himself: a dreamer surrounded by doubt. For them, he is living evidence that broken beginnings don't dictate endings. And yet, his impact reaches even deeper into the way people view aging, masculinity, and reinvention. In a culture that discards its icons once they wrinkle, Harvey has made 50, 60, and 70 look like the prime of purpose. His immaculate suits, his unapologetic discipline, his fearless public vulnerability all have reshaped the archetype of what it means to be a man in the public eye. Strong, but not stoic. Faithful, but flawed. To his fans, he's the last of an old breed, a storyteller in the tradition of Richard Pryor and Bill Cosby, but molded by hardship and humility. To Hollywood, he's proof that charisma can outlast controversy. To himself, he's still that boy on East 112th Street who never stopped whispering, I will be on TV. Today, his legacy is measured not just in awards or wealth, but in echoes: the echo of laughter that has healed hearts, the echo of faith that has lifted strangers, the echo of perseverance that has reminded millions that failure is not fatal. And in that echo lies the real mystery of Steve Harvey's story. Not how he succeeded, but how he kept succeeding when the world expected him to stop. Because legacies aren't about what you leave behind, they're about what keeps living after you're gone. And Steve Harvey's story, with all its scars and second chances, will live as long as faith and resilience still mean something. Steve Harvey's life is more than an entertainment career, it's a parable about endurance. The kind of endurance that isn't glamorous or Instagram perfect, but raw, bloody, and deeply human. In every era, Hollywood has crowned its kings, but few wore the crown with the visible cracks of survival quite like Steve Harvey. At Celebrity Forgotten, we often explore the hidden costs of fame, the quiet tragedies behind the spotlight, and Harvey's story might be one of the most haunting examples of that truth. His rise wasn't a straight climb. It was a fight through humiliation, failure, and self-doubt. He built his empire not on opportunity, but on pain, on those nights when he slept in his car, on those mornings when he couldn't afford breakfast, on those years when laughter was both his weapon and his wound. What makes his journey so compelling isn't the triumph, it's the transparency. Harvey never pretended to be perfect. He didn't hide the divorces, the debts, the mistakes, the tears. He turned them into testimony. He became proof that you can stumble in public and still stand tall in the end. But there's a darker beauty to his legacy too. The tragedy of Steve Harvey isn't just in his hardships, it's in the price he paid for resilience. In chasing greatness, he lost peace. In providing for millions, he almost lost himself. Behind the wide smile that became his trademark was a man constantly at war with time, with exhaustion, with the fear that failure might one day come knocking again. It's that contradiction that makes him unforgettable. The man who could make the world laugh while quietly breaking inside. The preacher who told us to dream bigger, even as he confessed that his own dreams once nearly destroyed him. For decades, he has been the voice of faith and discipline, the man who turned humor into healing, who could speak of God and grit in the same breath. Yet even he admits that faith is not freedom from fear. You don't graduate from struggle, he once said. You just learn how to fight differently. That's the truth. Few are brave enough to live out loud. And maybe that's why Steve Harvey's story matters now more than ever. In an age obsessed with perfection, he reminds us that brokenness is not the opposite of success, it's the soil it grows from. In an industry that devours the weak, he shows that vulnerability can be strength. At his best, Harvey is both mirror and myth, a reflection of every person who's ever felt invisible, and a living symbol that it's never too late to rewrite your story. His brand of success isn't clean or comfortable, it's bruised, prayer-soaked, and deeply human. Critics can argue about his controversies, his boldness, or his preaching tone, but even his missteps have weight. They remind us that legacy is not built from flawlessness, but from endurance. Maybe that's why millions connect with him, not because he's a star, but because he's a survivor. Because beneath the fame and fashion is the same boy from East 112th Street who just refused to stop believing. At Celebrity Forgotten, we see his life as a cautionary tale wrapped inside a triumph. It's a reminder that every success hides a shadow, and every spotlight burns if you stand under it too long. So perhaps the real question isn't what happened to Steve Harvey, it's what didn't destroy him. He's the embodiment of an unkillable dream, the man who proved that even when life tears your paper in half, you can still rewrite your promise. And that's the haunting truth about Steve Harvey. He didn't escape tragedy, he turned it into purpose. There's something eerily poetic about Steve Harvey's story. The boy who once whispered his dream into the silence of a broken-down Ford grew into a man whose voice reached every corner of the world. Yet somehow, even at the height of glory, that silence, the one from his childhood, still echoes. He is 68 now, the laughter lines deeper, the energy softer, but the eyes, those determined, weathered eyes, still hold the same fire that carried him from East 112th Street to global stages. Time has etched humility into his features, but also peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from victory, but from surrender, from finally understanding that some battles were never meant to be won, only endured. When Steve speaks today, his words feel like echoes from another world. Don't let the world tell you who you are, he says. They didn't make you. The advice sounds simple, but you can feel the years it cost him to learn it. The marriages lost, the sleepless nights, the loneliness between shows. For a man who once measured his worth in applause, silence has become his greatest teacher. The irony is that the world still laughs with him, still quotes him, still tunes in every morning as if afraid to imagine a day without that voice. But perhaps Steve Harvey's real story isn't about the sound of laughter, it's about the silence that follows. The kind of silence where you finally hear yourself breathing after decades of noise. He's seen the price of dreams. He's buried fear under faith, turned humiliation into headlines, and walked through the valley of his own making. The child who once stuttered through a classroom assignment became the man who mastered the world stage. The teacher who tore his dream in half may have won that day, but she lost the century. Now, when he looks back, it's not the success he talks about most. It's the people. The kindness of strangers who fed him when he was hungry. The friends who believed when no one else did. The father whose faith lit his path long after he was gone. And maybe that's the legacy, learning that the real triumph isn't the fame, the houses, or the empire. It's the moment you realize that you're finally enough, that you don't need to be seen by the world to matter. Steve Harvey once said, "My pain made me funny, but my faith made me free." His life will forever sit at the crossroads of tragedy and triumph, a story that refuses to end neatly because life rarely does. But it lingers like a gospel note that fades into eternity, haunting, healing, unforgettable. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now, you know.